You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the latest episode of Star Trek Picard called No-Win Scenario. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
And Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, we got a lot of great listener feedback for you to stick around to the end and listen to, because we love to get your feedback and we want to share that with you. Be sure to get your very own Secrets of Star Trek t-shirt by visiting sqpn.com/merch. And I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy. If you enjoy this, you'll enjoy Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where you can find wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/mysterious. So, Jimmy, we had a little bit of a follow-up from last week.
Yeah, so I'd seen an interview with LeVar Burton where he mentioned his daughter being on the show, and I assumed that that was the daughter that we've already met on the show, who's the pilot of the Titan. And you uncovered evidence that that actress is not his daughter, and it turns out we're both right. He has a second daughter who we'll be meeting later in the series that is played by his real-life daughter.
Right. Yeah, that's Micah, I think is LeVar Burton's actual daughter's name. Yeah, Ashley Chestnut is the actress who plays Sydney LaForge. So that'll be good. So let's get right into it then. Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens?
Well, this week, unfortunately, the Rafi Musiker show is on its mid-season hiatus. But on the Captain Picard show, we flash back to 5 years ago, where Captain Picard is telling stories of his career to a group of cadets in a bar. Meanwhile, inside the nebula today, everyone on the Titan has about 4 hours to live. Picard takes Jack to a holodeck bar in an attempt to bond as father and son before the end, but they're interrupted by Captain Shaw, who is high on pain meds. He tells a horrific story of being a young engineer at the Battle of Wolf 359, and it's clear he deeply resents Picard as Locutus. Meanwhile, with Riker's authorization, Seven goes hunting for the Changeling. Beverly figures out that the biological waves from the nebula are actually contractions, and it's about to give birth. Jack figures out that they can use the waves as a source of energy to recharge the warp engines. Shaw, I guess no longer high on the pain meds, is enlisted to work on the ship's older warp engines to make this possible, and this action flushes out the Changeling, who Seven kills. The ship then surfs its way out of the nebula, and on their way out, they throw an asteroid at the Shrike and severely damage it. For the moment, they're safe. And the nebula has given birth to a bunch of giant squid space babies, kind of like the ones from Encounter at Farpoint, bringing us full circle conceptually to where the next gen started. But we flash back to 5 years ago in that bar and realize that Jack was there when Picard was telling stories. He asked Picard if he ever had a family, and Picard happily said that Starfleet was the only family he ever needed. And that was why Jack never introduced himself to his father. He felt rejected. We finish on Jack having a weird vision and hearing a voice that says, "Find me," and "Together soon." The end.
If you build it, they will come. Oh, wait.
Yes. Heading to the corn. So, first impressions of this episode, Jimmy, what did you think of overall?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a fun episode. I think the series continues to gain strength. This was a very interesting episode. There's some weird stuff, like the most bizarre communications method ever seen in science fiction television, which I'm sure we'll get to. But there was a lot of good stuff here.
Father Cory, what'd you think of this one?
So I'm convinced now that there was this show that had 2 seasons that featured Picard and 7 of 9, and now we finally got the season of Star Trek Picard we wanted. And this episode kind of shows that. This is probably the best. I'm going to just flat out say this is the best episode of Picard they've aired so far. Period. We see Picard as confident. He's a leader. He's not second guessing himself. He's not, trying to be, oh, I'm so sorry for everything I've ever done. We see a crew that's competent. They're doing what they need to do and they get it done. And this is the spirit of Next Generation, of those series we wanted, at least I wanted. And so this was a great episode. I ding it for the throwback to Farpoint, the worst introductory Star Trek episode ever, but that's neither here nor there. No, I really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. It's got its weaknesses, everything does, but I really enjoyed it.
I wonder if the giant squid space babies are meant to be the same species as from Farpoint. They don't look exact. I mean, they're both squidiform. They don't look exactly the same, but neither do Klingons. So that could be chalked up to just changes in special effects.
Yeah. We do get a Farpoint reference in this one too.
Yeah, we do.
They do mention Farpoint, and that's why I think they were meant to be the same species, just with 40 years of graphics improvement.
Yeah. And adorable eyes, by the way.
Yeah. Multiple adorable eyes. Yeah. But because of that reference, because they say at one point, we've encountered other spacefaring life forms, and Picard says, like at Farpoint. And it's like, oh, you forgot about the giant one that was trying to suckle the Enterprise? Because that's the more famous one. And so to deliberately go back to Farpoint, where the things appear on screen for a few seconds, and my first thought when it gives birth is, oh, this is where that race comes from. This is their reproduction. And since they have contractions, that apparently means they're mammals. because you only have live births with mammals, otherwise it's eggs.
That's right. They didn't even go back to the crystalline entity, which would be a lore connection, which is interesting. My overall impression is, can we have Terry Matalas do all future Star Trek episodes as the showrunner, or Star Trek series? I mean, because so far, I mean, apart from Strange New Worlds, and Lower Decks is its own thing. I'll grant you that. Mm-hmm. This is a superior season of than anything Discovery has done, and superior than anything the two previous Picards, and better than Enterprise, frankly, I think, even.
Star Trek Enterprise? Oh, yeah, better than that.
Yeah.
At least better than the first three seasons of that.
Yes.
It was also in Enterprise when they finally got a showrunner who was a fan that started mining the lore. That's when Enterprise got good. And that's what's same thing happening on Picard.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's interesting too, because there's a lot of YouTubers who have been extremely critical of everything being done in Star Trek name, and even some of them are starting to turn around. One of them, known as the Critical Drinker, is one of those who, I mean, he was brutal against some of the, Discovery and a couple others, and with good reason. I mean, he'd actually, you watch his videos and he would put out, this is where they're falling short. This is where they're messing up. I mean, he wasn't just, this is bad because I don't like it. He's saying it's bad because here's reasons.
He had reasons, yeah.
And very good reasons. And he's been praising this season of Picard, including especially this episode. So yeah.
There has been some pushback. I mean, I have seen Critical Drinker. There's another guy, Dave Cullen, who has been really highly praising this season of Picard, but he's also pointed out some flaws. This episode in particular, he pointed out several things that I thought were very interesting. One was, at the end of the previous episode, Riker says, "Get yourself off the bridge. You've just killed us all." Mm-hmm. And he pointed out correctly that was right for Riker to speak that way in front of the bridge crew was unprofessional and counterproductive, because saying that in front of your bridge crew will scare the hell out of them and make it harder to get out of the current crisis, because it's like, our captain has just given up. We're all dead.
Yep.
And now he's lashing out at the crew, even though he's the captain and the buck stops with him. All Picard was an advisor. He was an insubordinate advisor, but all he was an advisor, and you took his advice. And do not lash out at people for giving you their advice. That's what he's there for as your acting first officer. And that's not necessarily a writing flaw. It's a character flaw. Where there is more of a flaw, and it's on the writing end, is in the bar scene in this episode where Picard drops an F-bomb. And apparently it was Patrick Stewart himself who did the writing for that. It was an ad lib. But they still included it in the episode, and it's an unnecessary F-bomb. And frankly, it's in the course of him telling the story of how Jack Crusher died, and wow, did they de-heroicize that story, because we'd already had it presented to us as this tragic thing that happened to this very good man who was a hero and we can all look up to, even though we've never met him, and apart from a hologram. And now it's like he and Picard were just going to get laid. It's like, thank you. We did not need that as part of the mythos.
Right. Well, that's not when Jack died, but it's the famous story when they needed to be rescued, and it was no win scenario. But yeah,
I conflated those then, but that's how I understood it. Incidentally, there's another though really good bit of writing, which is the way Shaw just savages Picard in his speech. I've heard it compared to the character Quint from Jaws. This is his Quint speech. And he just savages Picard in that. And because Picard and Jack are having this father-son bonding moment, and in comes Shaw, and he's high, and he just blunders into this and says, "Oh, sorry if I'm interrupting." And then he gives this amazing speech, which, I saw Will Wheaton suggest this speech is going to be like on top 10 speeches in Star Trek videos from here on out because it's so good. And at the end of it, Picard just says, "I understand," and he leaves and he walks off in shame. And then later in the episode, when Picard needs Shaw, because magically he's the only person on board who's old enough to know how to fix the warp engines the way they need them fixed, he comes to him and says, "I need you, even though and he uses a word from Chicago, and Shaw doesn't make a big deal of it. He just goes to work. And one of the things Dave Cullen was pointed out is unlike Discovery, we don't have a hug it out moment between Picard and Shaw. They settled their differences like men.
Right.
And Shaw even recognized his mistake when he let it all out right away. It's like, apparently I
at some point
being with charm. Well,
he says, "Forgive me." At some point, bleep being a-hole became a substitute for charm. Yeah, just say it. which is a good line, and I'm sorry I can't say it because it's a family show, but it's
pain in the
actually
rear end.
Pain in the rear end.
Use that word.
Let's call that, yes.
One thing I pointed out early on, when you look at the closing credits, you see things like the star date of Wolf 359, the USS Constance, and then the 10 forward and the holodeck. Well, that's all explained right here. That's where that came from.
Right.
Because that's what this is, So it'd be interesting to see what other the little nuggets they put in the closing credits will play out.
So let's go back to the top, because it's interesting to me that every episode starts with a flashback of some sort or another. So I think so far every episode has started with a flashback. And so this flashback is 5 years ago. Picard's at 10 forward in Los Angeles, and these cadets, he's trying to eat his lunch. And this must be like a Patrick Stewart, like, "Oh yeah, this happens to me all the time. I'm out at a restaurant and if some fan comes up and wants to get an autograph." I mean, this is probably something that the actors have to deal with on a regular basis.
I still found the Starfleet cadets repeated intrusions, even after Picard repeatedly signals, "I want to eat my lunch now." They just keep interrupting him with hero worship questions. I found that cringy.
It was cringy. And partly fans do that. But they asked him about this time he was hunted by a Hirogen, and they asked the obvious questions like, how did they get from the Delta Quadrant? And, it's this hinting at this great story that I would love to actually have seen, of Picard against the Hirogen. And it's kind of fun. Again, we have a Star Trek fan running this season, and so it feels cool to have this sort of stuff put in here. I should mention, by the way, Jonathan Frakes directed this, so this episode. So that's another reason why it's so good. And this is where we get the reference to the no-win scenario. He says, no matter how bleak or unwinnable the situation, as long as the crew remains steadfast in their dedication to each other, they are never without hope. And that's really the theme for this episode, is when they're divided, when they're alone in their grief or despair, their things are falling apart. But it's when they set that aside, suck it up, remember the Starfleet officers and legends, and get to work, things get better.
And that's one thing I like about this is it's not the I don't believe in a no-win scenario, aka Kirk. It's like, no, there are going to be times when you're just not going to win. It's going to happen, I mean, that's the whole point of the Kobayashi Maru thing, which we know that Kirk cheated at. But but there's still hope. There's hope that, if nothing else, you can make the best out of this no-win scenario.
Right. By the way, my guess is the reason that they didn't just call this Kobayashi Maru as an episode title is they've used that as an episode title, I think, at least 3 times in Star Trek. So probably let's put that one to rest.
Well, this isn't exactly a Kobayashi Maru scenario anyways.
No, it's not. So then we, after the teaser, we get to the first act, and we're in the present day, and power's failing. They keep having to divert everything to life support, and Riker is just holding on. Riker's idea is, because he's in despair, and he just is, we need to last as long as we can for rescue. Rescue's not coming, and he knows the rescue's not coming. And so he's kind of given up, which is, kind of wild for Will Riker to be having given up. And
this also touches on something that's become kind of a writing trope that I find a little bit annoying, which is talk of power on board the ship. Not personal power or military authority, but physical energy. They talk as if there's a limited amount of energy that they have being generated all the time, and they have to shunt it between different systems. And so we get lots of dialogue about shunting power between different systems and what systems you're going to choose to prioritize. And it's just really empty to me. This kind of dialogue does not happen on real world naval vessels or on real world spaceships. You don't have a central power supply that you're shunting around to different things in this way.
Yeah.
And it comes off as boilerplate, uncreative. It's like back on Star Trek Enterprise, they didn't have shields, so they had hull plating, and it's like, charge the hull plating, and it's like, dude, you just said raise the shields without saying raise the shields. It's just really uncreative. You're not really embracing the nature of this technology. You're just using surrogates for later technology, and it was lazy on a writing level. And I find this let's shunt power around between different systems dialogue lazy. I also find it ridiculous that the holodeck has an independent power supply so it can serve as a chapel in times of crisis.
Well, actually, this goes back to Voyager. In fact, Terry Mattel has put up a video where Voyager established in several episodes that the holodeck has an independent power supply to serve not as a chapel, as a safe place, as a survival zone.
But it doesn't need to be a holodeck. It can just be a room.
Right. I guess because the holodeck can provide food and
except it can't. All that you walk out of the holodeck is going to vanish from your stomach.
Well, they can. Oh, I don't think that's ever been established. I think.
Yeah, they have people walking out of holodecks holding drinks and stuff, and they vanish.
They dematerialize.
Yeah.
But I always took it as it's replicating actual food and drink. But yeah, I don't know that's ever been established.
But but it is something that was established, and Voyager established that the power systems, because I don't know, different frequency, different voltage, different plasma, who knows, is not compatible with the rest of the ship.
Yeah, so they couldn't use
they can't just say, we'll take the holodeck power source and shunt it to the rest of the ship.
I would approve of that explanation more. It's still ridiculous that you have holodecks operating in emergency situations, but I mean, if you're strapped for power, but so we could all have a emotional safe space during a crisis is not a convincing explanation to me.
Yeah. Well, I can understand from a dramatic standpoint, because the holodeck provided this dramatic setting that they could use. That is important, because then when they get in there, Jack says, "Oh, I've never been to 10-4," but of course he has, and it has this. We find out it has this resonance for him of this disappointment that Picard doesn't know about.
By the way, before we get too far away from the beginning of the episode, we probably should mention Riker's character arc in this episode, because he's in a very dark place. He kind of goes to Picard, who he's kicked off the bridge, and he kind of apologizes to him without apologizing. But he does say, "You were right before." And he also says that in all the years he's been traveling with Picard, he's never seen anything that convinced him there was an afterlife. And that's what's led to that, coupled with the death of his son, is what's led to his current marital difficulties, because Deanna can feel everything and she couldn't live with me feeling nothing. So apparently in the wake of the death of his son, he's been having an existential crisis, and Deanna has found him unbearable to be around because of the numbness he feels. And so that's interesting. I like them bringing in Deanna's empathic abilities and how it would make it hard to live with someone who's going through a crisis. On the other hand, she is a counselor, and she should know how to help someone in his situation. And an aspect of this that's believable is that they had a child die and now they're having marital difficulties, because that is extraordinarily common. Yep. If a child dies, it puts such strain on the parents that marriages frequently break up. Not always. I know a couple who had a child die and they are still together decades later, but it is very common for marriages to break up, especially in the secular 25th now century. That would be the case. But what's less believable is that this is happening to Riker now, because apparently his son died years ago, and that's when the crisis should have hit. He should have resolved it by now. But then by witnessing the birth at the end of the episode, it gives him renewed optimism, and he reaches out to Deanna, and it looks like they're going to try to patch things up.
Well, I got the feeling from the end conversation between Deanna and Will that this was Riker doing this. This was not Deanna kicking him out or anything like that. So I can see that where he's hit a point in his life where he's entered into a depressive state, or however you want to describe it, and he feels like he's being unfair and harmful to her, and so he is the one who leaves. And so I can see that. I can find that completely plausible. And that is one thing I like about this episode, is we do see him kind of coming to that realization that it's his fault that there's the marital problems, and he's willing to fix it. And that was one of my complaints, one of my concerns from the beginning of the season, where they talk about, they had that one throwaway line, or not so throwaway line, but that one little line about, about basically where she should be glad that I'm not around, kind of deal. And I was like, great, they're going to break up this relationship. And no, they're not. They're actually going to repair it. And I think that's a wonderful thing to see on TV today.
I think it's also believable that Riker, now having changed careers, retired, or essentially no longer captain of a ship, that change could bring about other emotional and mental crises, like highlighting the crisis having to do with his son, and that has come out now. So I think it's interesting. I also think it's interesting. Go ahead.
I was going to say, just be clear, he hasn't retired. He's still an active captain. He's just not the captain of a ship.
Right. I also think it's interesting how, the show kind of lays out in the script, a lack of belief in something beyond ourselves leads to nihilism, a sense of futility of existence, a paralyzing fear of death, and despair. I mean, the show kind of comes right out and says that, which is, I think, fascinating for Star Trek, that it would come out and say that a belief in something beyond ourselves and beyond this existence is necessary for us. Intentionally not.
And a little part of me is like, take that, secular humanist. Will Riker, Right. It's kind of like there's a moment in the movie, in the 1978 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where the Body Snatchers are, and this movie is set in San Francisco, and it's the 1970s. And so this is a center of liberal culture. And at one moment, as the menace is surrounding our main characters, Jeff Goldblum turns to Donald Sutherland and says, "Matthew, do you have a gun?" And Matthew says, "No." And I'm like, take that, you San Francisco liberals. You see what happens if you don't have a gun, and the body snatchers are going to come and get you all. And part of me is the same way with this. It's like, okay, maybe you want to be a little more open to religion.
That's right.
Shouldn't just be the Bajorans and the Klingons.
Right, exactly. So we have we have this whole part where Seven has been put on the changeling hunt by Riker, who wants to keep it quiet, the existence of a changeling, so as not to hurt morale. Although
I know that
was the moment.
That line was is like, okay, we could have worked on that line a little bit more.
Right. But he figures that since they're doomed, the changeling has nothing left to work for, so it's not going to be actively trying to, create havoc. So it's okay for Seven to be hunting without the rest of the crew knowing, just to sort of keep it quiet. So to hunt it in unofficial capacity. And so she starts in her own quarters. Did you know she still has her Calto game, that she got from Tuvok?
That wasn't her quarters.
That was the transporter chief's quarters.
Yep.
Didn't she start? I think that it started in her quarters. Like she was.
There is a Calto game, but I believe it's the transporter chief's Calto game.
It's the same room where she finds the bucket hidden behind the light fixture.
Okay.
Not a very good hiding place.
No, it's not. And is this like a standard changeling bucket, I guess?
It does look pretty similar, and we got a visual callback to Rene Auberjonois as Odo in this.
Nice.
And we should comment on this scene because she goes to Shaw for advice about hunting the changeling, and he's in his quarters, and she comes in, and he's like, "I can't officially talk to you." And she says, "Well, then can we talk unofficially?" "No." Well, and then she keeps talking to him anyway.
Yeah.
And he tells her about changelings. He mentions that they've got to revert to their gelatinous state for 8 hours a day. It's their version of sleeping, and they get in a bucket, and he shows her a picture of what the bucket might look like, and we get the visual callback to Odo because they have an illustration of Odo next to the bucket, and he says they can leave residue in the bucket, or because he's high, he's mashing his words together a little bit, and he says residue.
Yeah.
And so find the bucket, scan the residue, and then scan the ship. And that'll tell you where the changeling is. So she does that, and there's this triumphant moment where she's got the data she needs, and she's like, residue. And they're just, you can tell the writers are having fun with the dialogue, and
Right.
it works really well. And it's also another fascinating character moment for Shaw. And even in this state, he's able to inspire, Seven of Nine, who he's not had good relations with. So it's part of his redemption arc as well.
Yeah, I like right at the beginning when she comes to the quarters and she's ringing the bell, and he's saying, instead of saying "come in," which is what they would usually say, he says, "Don't come in, don't come in," and he's sharpening his knife on a sharpening stone, and then when she goes in, she explains this changeling had to be here before Picard, Riker, the Crushers came aboard. There's something bigger going on. I like that they point that out because. Because I didn't realize. Yeah, right. There has to be a bigger thing. Why was there a changeling on this ship? Maybe there's a changeling on every ship. Who knows?
And there's a part of that dialogue too where she Seven's admitting is like, I don't know the crew as well as you. You would know them better. You would be able to pick out who this person is. And he goes, well, just look for people who aren't acting the way they would normally. That you can catch them in a trap. Conversationally. And, like he's talking about, you're a smart officer and all these things, he's kind of buttering her up a little bit. And she goes, which is what you would say if you were a changeling.
and not a jerk, basically.
Not a jerk, yeah.
Not the word she uses, but not a jerk.
I love that. I love that dialogue. And he goes, you got it.
I love Shaw is who he is. He's just, and he doesn't have to be everybody's friendly favorite officer to be competent and good.
Also, the bar speech he gives sheds new light on why he doesn't want to think of her as Seven of Nine, why he wants to think of her as Annika Hansen, because he's got Borg issues.
Yeah. Yes. I want to go deeper into that in a bit. But I do also want to point out, why not do phaser sweeps and blood tests like we saw in DS9? Well, that requires everybody in the crew knowing about what's going on. Right. Yep. So they explain that. Meanwhile, Riker is doing his goodbye message to Deanna, which he can't quite finish. He's
got writer's block.
Yeah, he's stuck, and I think he's stuck, personally, and that's this story of this episode is Riker getting unstuck, literally, figuratively, emotionally. So then we have that holodeck scene, and this is where I said, why is the holodeck running when the ship is critically low in power? And the showrunners are doing it again. They're like anticipating our objections, like Jack's accent and now the holodeck use. So at least they tell us that, they give us a reason.
That's a pretty low bar, but yeah.
It's a bar they did not always cross in the past on Star Trek.
It is a canon bar. Yeah. I mean, they jump over the canon bar, if you will.
So,
and then we get one of the best lines in the episode where Picard and Jack are talking, and Jack says, "So let's talk about the elephant in the room. The hair. When did it go?" And Picard says, "Enjoy it while you've got it."
Yeah. Patrick Stewart, I remember seeing in an interview saying that he started losing his hair in his early 20s. So it's why he asks Jack, how old are you? 23, 22, 23? Yeah, enjoy it while you can.
By the way, I'm sure most people listening to this might know this, but originally they wanted Picard to wear a
wig.
Right. Or a toupee. And have you seen the pictures where they did that in tryouts, and it looked awful. It looked terrible. And I think that's why they decided not to do it to good measure.
Yes. So
I have seen parts where Patrick Stewart had hair. He's in I, Claudius, the 1970s BBC series, which is amazing. It is extraordinarily, it's just brilliantly cast. It's also can be very intense in some places, but it's brilliantly cast. It's very well written. And he plays Aelius Sejanus, who was this Roman official during the reign of Tiberius, who basically kind of, when Tiberius wanted to retire to the island of Capri, so he left Sejanus in charge, and Sejanus turned out to be a total thug who instituted a reign of terror and started to even there's indications he like wanted to become emperor himself. And it was a conspiracy involving Claudius and Caligula that managed to get Sejanus the information get Tiberius the information he needed to know what Sejanus was really doing that led to his downfall. But Patrick Stewart is Sejanus, and he's still got the like Patrick Stewart polite smugness as he's knifing people, and his body ends up, in like on the Tibernian steps where it belongs.
Nice. So in the bar, Picard does actually ask Jack why you didn't want to know me. Like, why didn't you come and find me? Which at this moment, I noticed Jack doesn't say. He instead tells him a story about going to Metalis 4. And that's because, as we found at the end, because Jack did try to come and find him. And so I like that they tie those together at this point.
And he's trying not to crush his father before they're about to die by telling him, I did, and you flippantly rejected me without even realizing it.
Yeah, exactly. And then this is about when Shaw comes in, and there is some other things that happen, but I want to talk about the Shaw thing first. And first we get another flashback where Picard is telling the cadets about Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. He's continuing to tell the story, and the cadet then asks him about the situation with Jack Crusher Sr. That was the no-win scenario, and that's where we come back to the present, and more crews coming onto the holodeck. Jack is talking to Picard about being part of something bigger. I don't need to be part of anything bigger. I'm fine on my own, and Picard disagrees. And then that's when Shaw shows up, and we're having this great father-son bonding moment, and the rest of the crew is kind of getting into it too, as he talks about the shuttle being dead in the water and having to navigate blind all the way home. And Shaw shows up and really just trying to think of a polite way. Yeah.
Real quick comment before we talk about Shaw. Just this conversation between Jack and Picard and the crew coming in, and they're this is how you do. We're all together in this moment, not Discovery. This is how you do it. It actually has emotional depth to it,
without having to say we're okay in our okayness in togetherness,
and we're together in our togetherness, and we're on the USS Emotional Discovery.
That's right. So, and that's when Shaw comes in and kind of jumps in and starts laying into Picard with this story about, has your old man told you about the Battle of Wolf 359?
Has he told you about the first time we met?
Right.
And then it turns out they never met face to face, but they figuratively met at the Battle of Wolf 359.
Yeah, so Shaw was a junior engineer on board the Constance when they were hit by the Borg. There was 50 survivors and a life pod that can fit 10. And it's this great, as you mentioned, this great speech where this lieutenant chooses 10 at random, and Shaw was the 10th man. And
he's got incredible survivor guilt now.
Right.
And it deeply resents Picard as Locutus, and he, dubs him the most dangerous Borg of all, the only one to get a name.
Yeah, the one so deadly they gave him a name. I like that way that they phrased that, Locutus of Borg. And Picard, like you mentioned, he takes it, walks out, and Shaw kind of apologizes to the crew members who are present. Forgive me. At some point, being an a-hole became a substitute for charm. And, it's an interesting character moment. Shaw might be the most interesting new character in all of Picard. I'm liking this character more and more. So I want to jump back then to the other stuff that's going on. Beverly knows that the bioelectric jolts are coming regularly, and she's counting them down. And we have a very interesting dramatic moment.
Yeah, it's like, how is she doing that? How is she counting between when these things arrive? Because they're simulating contractions, but there doesn't seem to be a realistic way. She's not looking at it. It would be, I would feel happier if she was like reading a display.
Wasn't she?
That was in one scene she was maybe looking at a device.
Okay.
But it wasn't clear to me. She just seemed to know when these things were going to hit.
Yeah. I thought I thought I remember her looking at something at one point, but maybe not in every one of those. Yeah.
There was at least one scene where she had a pad in her hand as she was doing this.
Okay.
Yeah. But I just think they could have made it clearer.
Ones.
Yeah. It was interesting, the dramatic, the way that it was this beat throughout the episode of her every once in a while counting down, and sometimes counting, and then the next number was the first word of the next character's line as we switched scenes. Like at one point it was 7, and another point, someone said 5. So it was kind of an interesting way that they did that. So the Shrike emerges from the nebula, and Vadic goes up to this device and cuts off her hand.
Yeah.
So she's apparently a changeling, right?
Yeah.
Well, we've never seen a changeling do that.
Yeah.
But in some of the behind the scenes stuff, I've seen indication that, yeah, she's a changeling, in which case, why does she have this scarred face? I guess that's for effect. And why is she working with this alien looking crew? I mean, maybe there are other members of the Dominion we've just never seen before.
Yeah.
But so this is the most bizarre communications method ever seen. She goes to this table, she cuts off her hand, and her hand transforms into a floating face that gives her orders.
Yeah. On this particular table, which apparently is what is the communicator. Yeah, it's a very weird thing. Yeah.
I figured Vadic was an actual person and that this changeling had replaced her, and that's why still had the scars and everything.
Yeah.
Because the changelings have shown that that's where they're willing to do that, kill someone off and take their place. So it's easy to understand that that's the same thing here. And maybe that'll come out in later episodes. They'll kind of explain that little, because she's not dead. She's just, the ship is disabled.
Yeah.
And the Titan's able to get away because of that.
Yeah, and so the floating head orders her to pursue, even though she says that, the ship carrying Jack Crusher is in this gravity well. It's not expected to survive. And the floating head orders her to pursue it. And she says, well, I can't really do that because X, Y, and Z. And it says, I don't care. Go anyway. You and everything else are expendable, which means Jack Crusher is really extraordinarily important to them.
Right.
Because especially if she's a changeling, sending a changeling to their death is like,
it's a big deal.
It's a huge deal for changelings.
Yep.
And so, I guess we'll find out more about that.
So, and so she has to drop the portal system, by the way.
Yes.
She can't take it. Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the bloody goo in the room. And a number of our listeners on our Discord were commenting how the changeling goo is a lot different from what we saw in DS9. It's not just an amorphous tan beige goo. It's actually kind of fleshy. It's like And that changes how you think about the changelings and the Great Lake, for one thing. A planet covered in this fleshy goo is kind of gross when you think about it.
Yeah. This is definitely where they're trying to update the special effects, because when DS9 was on and you see Odo change, that was pretty revolutionary special effects for television at the time. This wasn't long after Terminator 2, where you saw the T-1000 doing this, and of course that's where they got the idea for that special effect. So now they want to update it to make it more realistic, and so instead of making look more realistic Mercury, they make it look like more realistic pulp and flesh and yuck.
Yeah, it changes how you think of the changelings. That's for sure.
Someone brought up the scene where Odo melded into Lwaxana Troy's
lap
dress, and it's like, ew.
Yeah. So then Seven has, like you mentioned, found the pot, but then this changeling attacks her in the corridor, destroys the pot, which there was a funny scene with Shaw where he's like, find the pot, and she's like, cannabis? No, literal pot. And while as he does this, he actually kills another crew member in the corridor. So she's back to square one with that. Meanwhile, Beverly goes to Picard, and this is where she says the gravity well is drawing in matter and expelling energy and its contractions. And then Jack comes up with the idea to use the waves to escape. So they're both going to surf the wave and absorb the wave through the nacelle, opening up the nacelle panels so that they can get in there. And this is why Shaw is the one to do this, because he's the only guy old enough to remember how to hotwire the nacelle controls, because he's used to be a junior engineer.
So this is the ship geek complaint here that goes all the way back to the motion picture. This is a 20-year-old ship that has been refitted into a new class with new systems, with new hull, with new everything, but it's still a 20-year-old ship. This, there was complaint from TNG, or from the motion picture, was it was supposedly the same Enterprise from the original series, but absolutely everything has been changed. We got the ship of Thesis going on here.
Right.
Where everything's been changed, but it's the same ship. Well, that's the same thing here. Everything's been changed, but it's the same Titan, even though it's also got the A indicator, which indicates a whole new ship. Again, this is a ship geek complaint, but for those of us who are ship geeks, it's a complaint.
Yep. So Picard and Beverly and Jack take this plan to Riker, and this is where he's like stuck again. Nope. Starfleet protocol says we wait for rescue. And Picard's like, rescue ain't coming, Will. I mean, we got to get ourselves out of this. And it's Beverly who appeals to Diana, who would say it's about trust. And she says, let's do what we spent our entire lives learning to be great at.
Yeah. I found the writing in this scene a little problematic because Riker is unusually resistant to the proposal they're giving him. And I have in my notes, bad idea Riker is unusually resistant, because Riker has been plagued by bad ideas lately. And he's got a bad idea. They're giving you a good one. You should be listening to it.
Yeah. It kind of goes back to that scene in the last episode, the end of it, where he tells Picard, get out. Riker, Picard, Beverly, they're as great a crew as there's ever been, going back to the original Enterprise, and Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. They're the triumvirate, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. That's interesting. So Riker kind of rejecting this opportunity is really it's out of character for him. Yeah. And so they've tried to establish why, but it may be too much here.
It doesn't feel true to character, given who Riker is. It feels like they're wanting to juice the inner character drama, so they're making him abnormally adamant. Right.
And finally, it's Picard who has to say, if this is the end, let's face it together, doing what we know we do best. And Riker agrees. So they finally go for it. So we have Shaw and Seven in the cell control, Shaw doing his hot wiring thing, and they figure out what a changeling would do in this moment if there's a changeling looking for them. And so they do this typical trope of making a plan off screen with Riker. So they've made this plan that we don't get to see. We only hear Riker say, okay, it's Riker signing out, go ahead and do that. And it'll later on we'll only realize what it was a Seven saying, under no circumstances send anyone to help. Don't let anyone come down here to help, because they figured that's what the changeling will do, is say, assume someone else's form and say Riker sent me to help, which is what happens.
Yeah, and so the changeling shows up in the form of Geordi LaForge's daughter.
Yep.
And she is talking to Seven. She says exactly that. Riker sent me to help, even though we just saw her up on the bridge.
Yes.
Mere seconds ago.
Yep.
And she, in talking to Seven, she refers to her as Commander Hansen, at which point Seven vaporizes her. Well, doesn't vaporize, but kills her. And it's like, you could have just killed the real Geordi LaForge's daughter, because And she justifies this to Shaw, saying she refers to me as Commander 7. And it's like, okay, no. She referred to you as Commander 7 once when you were in a moment of vulnerability. Right. Now her commanding officer, who has forbidden us to call you by your Borg designation, is in the same room. So is she about to call you Commander 7 in front of the captain, who has said don't use that name?
I think in the case that she's holding a phaser to her chest, that she would understand. Okay, she wants the title, the more familial title. Let's put it that way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was a thin pretext in which to kill someone, but it's the moment. Yeah.
More accurate was the fact that this person came down from the bridge against orders from the captain. Or it was the changeling, shapeshifter.
Yeah. So back on the bridge, Riker gives Picard the con because he's got that experience of piloting blind, which doesn't make any sense. But okay, it's dramatically satisfying to fans to have Picard in the center seat, straightening his jacket as he sits, as he does, and saying engaged. That's what we need to have.
They also, at one point, because of all the power shunting that has to go on because of that trope, they turn off life support. And I found it fascinating. Gravity is not part of life support? Why else do you have it?
Because our budget doesn't allow for them to be floating around. I'm just kidding. So they do catch the wave, and the nebula starts charging up the ship, and they see the Shrike ahead. And Riker pulls a gambit right out of Galaxy Quest.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I have to give credit Father Andrew Kinstetter for that one, because
my ship is dragging mines.
And so
I like this too. This was kind of almost a throw it back at you, because the Shrike threw the
ship at them.
The ship, Crusher ship at them, so they threw a rock back at it.
I like that. So that was awesome to see that smash into them. And then space squid babies all over the place.
Yep.
And Beverly has a line, she in awe looking out at the view screen, to seek out new life. We have this mission statement, and Riker says, I think we should boldly get the hell out of here, which is that was really good. And then we see that flashback to Jack has seen that Picard's statement from 5 years ago, that you're only as good as your crew, comes true here. That being part of something bigger than yourself is the key to success in Star Trek terms. That's the whole Star Trek statement. And then we get that flashback to 10 Forward, and where Picard says Starfleet has been the only family I ever needed. And I cringed right there. I'm like, ow, that just, I can't imagine how that would feel to hear that.
That sounded exactly like what an admiral would be saying to a bunch of cadets who are, what's the importance of family when you're in the military? Oh, the military is the only family you really need.
Yeah.
I could see that, kind of buttering them up, and oh yes, got a hoorah military, kind of deal. I can see it.
It's also because Picard, as far as he knows, doesn't have a family.
Yep.
And his real family has died. I mean, they're all dead. Including his nephew and his brother and his brother's wife. They're all dead, and he has no family of his own. And it's very intrusive, to come up. I mean, as someone I'm a widower, if someone in public were to come up to me and I've just been, put upon by people wanting amazing stories, and I've told them a bunch of amazing stories, and then someone says to me, so how do you feel about being a widower with no children? Okay, that's a little bit of an inappropriate question for this context, but you don't want to say that to someone, so you find a face-saving alternative. And the face-saving alternative about, Starfleet is my family, it's the only one I've ever needed, that's a face-saving alternative. So I don't blame Picard at all for saying that. It's exactly what someone in his situation could say that would provide a face-saving, feel-good out for everyone in the room. He just doesn't realize this guy is actually a member of his family who is vulnerable himself. And so I think it was actually a kind of an inappropriate question for Jack to ask in this situation. If you want to make contact with your father, this isn't the way to do it. What do you expect him to say in this situation? Oh, right. I'm so sorry. I've never had a family. And what are you expecting him to say?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, and believe me, I've had that as a priest, had parishioners and other people come up. Well, what do you think about not having a family? One, none of your business. Two.
Right. Now, to be fair, if it's 5 years ago, Jack is 18 at this point?
Yeah.
He's a kid, he should know better, but he does know better. And the only people, I think dramatically, the audience feels awkward and Jack feels awkward. And that's really, the idea is, it's not, Picard isn't doing, like you said, Picard's not being mean. He's just protecting himself in a sense, protecting his privacy or, protecting himself from inappropriate questioning. So I think, I agree with that.
What I like, though, is they make it clear to us both Jack and Picard now remember this moment, and they just look at each other in recognition, and they don't have the need to talk about it. Yes.
Hug it out. So, and then we have Riker talking to Deanna, and this is where the reconciliation is beginning. Being away wasn't the answer, and seeing this amazing birth in the nebula, reminded him that there's a whole universe out there that can be beautiful and not just, death and despair and emptiness. And then, as you mentioned, we had this ending scene of Jack having this vision of I call it the branching voice. I don't know what it is, but saying in a feminine voice, "Find me and we'll be together soon." So...
yeah, as he's standing in front of a mirror in his quarters, hitting himself on the head. Yeah. And he also has this vision of this red door opening, or door in red light opening, and he has nebula branches behind him in the mirror. And
yeah,
it's like, why is this guy so important to the changelings?
Or is it? Is it the changelings?
Is he a virgin in the Force or something? Is Picard really his dad after all?
He's a clone, and he is a duality. Oh, wait, that's a different one.
Maybe he's a changeling who forgot he's a changeling.
So, very interesting to see. We've got the first half of the season done. There's a lot more to go.
First 40% done.
Yeah. So.
Also, something to note for the future, they raised it, they hung a lantern on it, but they didn't develop it in this episode. Why did the changeling impersonate a transporter officer? Apparently, that's going to be important in the future.
Right. They do raise that question. Right. Not replacing, Seven or Shaw, but yeah, interesting. So, last thoughts, Father Cory?
Something that's really small, but not just in my ship geek, but I'm also a craft beer geek. And as Picard's telling his story, on the picture behind him, there's a sticker for Left Hand Brewing in Colorado.
Nice.
Which is a really good brewery in Colorado. They make an excellent nitro milk stout that you can get in a can. That's delicious. If you're a craft beer geek, look up their beer. But it's good to see that craft beer still exists in the 25th century.
Nitro milk stout?
Yep.
They infuse it with nitrogen in the can, so it makes it very smooth.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the nitrogen. It's the milk part.
Yeah, it's got lactic acid in it, so it gives it kind of a milky, creamy flavor.
I never thought of combining milk and beer. Okay.
Well, it's not actual milk; it's just the lactic acid for milk. But yeah.
But it tastes, again, creamy, like it's got actual milk in it. So it's really good. I like it.
It is really good. I also like the fact that Jack tells him, "I'm not really a wine guy." Nice. So, Jimmy, any final thoughts?
Nope.
All right, let's get to our feedback then from our last episode 251, 17 seconds. First comment comes from Rogerio Schmidt on YouTube, who says, "Please, guys, let Father Cory talk too." Father Cory?
Well, I appreciate it, Rogerio. Last at week, I was dealing with an infected tooth that fortunately I got taken care of the next day. I was able to get it taken care of fairly quickly. So I wasn't speaking because I was not feeling very good to speak. So
we were covering
I appreciate
for
it
him.
though.
Yeah. Yes.
I appreciate it. So I was pretty sore, and speaking didn't help that.
Yeah. So our next feedback comes from Ryan, who writes in via email. With last week's talk of Discovery's cancellation and the possibility of new shows being announced, have there been any talks of a next generation? I could be imagining things, but I've always thought it was planned to end Picard and begin a new TNG-type show with a younger crew. Section 31, Worf and Raffi, and other ideas have been mentioned, but has anyone speculated a transition to a Generations-style handoff of sorts?
The only thing I've heard is speculations about more with the next gen crew. And so apparently after they got back into the swing of things, they all decided they were enjoying it so much that they would be willing to do more. And so I've heard speculations in that direction. Obviously, starting another next gen like series would be a possibility, but I haven't heard any speculation on that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same here.
Yeah. Ryan finishes, I get the feeling they tried this with the La Serena crew in previous seasons, but it never panned out.
I don't think that's what they were doing there. I think the La Serena crew was always created for Picard, and they knew going in that Picard was going to be a 3-season show.
Yeah. He does speculate Shaw, Seven, Ensign LaForge, Jack Crusher, and unmentioned others could be set up to be the new generation or Star Trek Titan, and maybe a future crossover with Lower Decks. Yeah,
There will be a future crossover with Lower Decks in the form of Strange New Worlds. We have Boimler and Mariner are going to be appearing on Strange New Worlds.
I could totally go for, just like we had with Strange New Worlds, where Captain Pike on Discovery, there was enough of a fan outcry that they made a Strange New Worlds show from that. I could see a Shaw 7 show, a Titan show coming out of this season of Picard would be kind of fun.
I agree. I don't know if it's going to happen because there's a lot of talk about Paramount having financial issues because what a surprise. Discovery wasn't as well accepted as they want to keep telling people, among other things. Of course, all these different media
streaming services,
they're just diluting the water too much, and people are having to choose what they can actually afford to watch. So I would love to see that. I think, if it was done as well as this season's Picard has been, I think it would be a really enjoyable series, but I'm not going to hold my breath on it. Let's put it that way.
Terry Matalis running a Star Trek Titan series? Yes, please.
That could be good. That could be very good.
Then Brian B. wrote in from Patreon, who wrote, No Win Scenario is one of the best episodes in all of Star Trek. I'm excited to see where we go from here. One question, though. Do we still hold grudges in the 25th century? Liam Shaw and Ben Sisko, for that matter, hold Picard responsible for Wolf 359. Do they think they would have done differently had they been the one assimilated? Is there no understanding or forgiveness given Picard's service after Best of Both Worlds?
Well, so in the case of these two officers, Sisko gets over it. It's an initial thing. And it's natural to resent the person who was responsible, even if he wasn't morally responsible, who was practically responsible for the death of your wife. And which has been Sisko's situation. And because Jennifer Sisko was killed at Wolf 359, when the ship that they were on was shot by the Borg. Captain Shaw has survivor guilt and, witnessed horrific numbers of deaths around him. He has and sure, it's irrational to blame Jean-Luc Picard because he was not in control of himself.
Right.
But that irrationality is a natural reaction. And as long as it's not carried to extremes, it's understandable and I would say dramatically acceptable within the context of a fundamentally good character. So Sisko, even though he has this resentment, gets over it. He's able to move past it. And so is Shaw. Shaw is not obsessing. He's high when he says all this, and he's not in a rational state of mind. And then he is able to get over it and work constructively with Picard, despite what he said when he was high.
Well, it is clear he does have some resentment still for the Borg, because how he treats Seven and how he treats Picard kind of come from that. But, it just shows that they're still human in the 25th century. Humans have held grudges since the beginning of humanity because of our sinful nature. We will continue to do so until the day our Lord returns, whenever that might be, whether it is this year or in the 25th century.
And drama makes good plot devices grudges make good dramatic plot devices. So, I remember that one time Roddenberry wanted Next Gen for them to be perfect and to have no negative human emotions, and everyone realized that would be a very boring show. So let's not do that.
Well, we still you couldn't have infighting on the bridge. So
yeah, right. So that's all of our feedback. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback. We love to get your feedback, and we'll tell you all the different ways you can send your feedback in a minute. But first, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including Clint C., John R., Mike M., Brett, and John M., John R. and John M., those two different ones. Their generous tax-deductible donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us this time. You can tell us what you think of no-win scenario by going to sqpn.com/trek or our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send an email to trek@sqpn.com, or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can also watch us in the Secrets of Star Trek in video on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, and leave a comment there. And we'll be back next time when we're discussing the next new episode of Picard called Imposter. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt.